and welcome to Emil Amok's Takeout, a special video version. If you're listening on audio to the podcast, oh, you're missing out because we got David here with us here in the Takeout box. How's it feel? You're in the Takeout box, EJR. You know,
it's great to be here. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Well, really, it's my honor to have you here, to see you in your home library with your books sort of askew there, and books on top of books, because there's
this is the only room where I can find some peace. I have 4 little children, so
well,
yeah.
You had 4, I had 3, and stopped and regretted it, and you had 4. That's great. Hey, but I saw you have a daughter who's a great basketballer. Like she's like moving through, putting through the
they're all into basketball. They're all pretty good. But she's been really working hard the past few weeks.
That's a Filipino thing, basketball, And
oh yeah.
She can be in the Zoom basketball league because we're really tall on Zoom. No, we're skill players. I could tell.
That's right.
She's a ball handler. It really is. It's interesting to talk to you because you are really the Filipino American of the moment. And no, I mean that. I mean that with all due respect, and I mean that really to really, you are talking about stuff that some of us have just been experiencing and don't know what the hell's going on here, But you are talking about the stuff, and your book, Brown Skin, White Minds, really, you did it. Other people have referred to it. Other people have talked about that thing, but you got it down. So I want to praise you for that. And we want to talk about the book, but let me just say one thing. As I say, E.J.Ramos David, I think Ramos. Hey, I'm related to some Ramoses.
Yeah. It's a big family.
It is. It's a big. I mean, and this is the thing about Filipinos. We all have the colonial last name, right? Guillermo, but at least I say Guillermo, and unlike some of my relatives who say Guillermo, I say, well, like the burrito line's over here. If you want lumpia,
That's right.
The burritos over there. Yeah.
We pronounce every letter.
Yeah, we love. We see the double L and we see the L and the Y.
Yes, we do both.
Yeah, we don't roll our R's, we roll our L's.
There you go.
Guillermo. Okay.
Huh?
I can't roll an R with a damn, but I can roll my L's. So. So EJ, it's good to see you, really, because I'm of a certain generation. We came, my father, and we know history, right? My father was in that first group. I mean, the first really official group, right? They skipped the Cicada, the Hawaiians that came straight from the log to California, 1929, because they didn't need no papers. They were Americans. They came as Americans.
Yep.
Came as Americans, and no one told them, oh, there's this thing called the Depression. You got to survive that. And so my father was smart. He said, I'm not going to the Valley because they're going to make me pick. I'm going to stay here in San Francisco. But Filipinos went into the Valley. They picked, and then they found discrimination. They took jobs, and then they took white women just because that was all that was available. So, and then everyone got mad about the Filipinos, and they started pounding on them, discriminating. We had the death for Min Tobera, 1930 in Watsonville. Our story, right? And we discover it. Now the phrase that you'll hear in the news these days is, not since the Great Depression. Unemployment numbers, as much or as large as the Great Depression. Now we really are back in the period of the Great Depression. And when you talk about things like Asians getting beat up because of the COVID the virus, we had discrimination, we had violence against Filipinos in the 30s. It's almost, oh my God, like this is like an historian's dream, right? It's like it's coming back, and now you can comment, right? It's
I mean, a lot of this isn't new, right? As you pointed out, racism isn't new. Racism against Asian Americans isn't new, and racism during economic depression and racism during a pandemic against Asian Americans isn't new. I mean, there's always this urge to look for a scapegoat whenever we fall on hard times. And Asian Americans and immigrants more generally really is a favorite scapegoat. It's really tradition. It's an American tradition to scapegoat Asian Americans and immigrants more generally whenever we struggle.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that is that we equate people, especially immigrants, and people of color more generally. We equate people to our economic value. Like how much taxes do we pay? How much do we contribute to the economy, right? Instead of just looking at us as people, as human beings. I think that's a fundamental flaw in how America, I think, has looked at people.
It's capitalism, right? You got to be a profit center, or you're like a profit drain, right? You're taking jobs, or you're filling jobs. You're a cheap labor, right?
Yep.
The Chinese, we didn't like the Chinese, so we excluded them. We brought in the Filipinos.
Yep.
Yeah, it's it's like you see these themes come back, like the leitmotif of history coming back to hit us. Like, oh yeah, where did I hear that before?
Yep.
Right? And it's like, it's.
I mean, you can repackage it in different ways, right? It has evolved over the years, but when it really comes down to it, it's the same thing.
It is the same thing. And to a historian like yourself, well, you're really kind of like broad. You're not just a historian.
I'm not a historian. I really want to reserve that term to folks who are real historians. I use history to contextualize my work. I'm a psychologist in training, a psychological scientist in training, and one of the bigger limitations that we have in my field, in the psychological field, is that we have failed to consider historical and sociopolitical factors in how we understand people's psychological experiences. And so I bring that into psychology. Historians look at my work and say, hey, your history is incomplete. Your history is not complete. Well, but I'm not a historian. I'm a psychological scientist, and I'm just trying to contextualize psychological work in history and sociopolitical reality. So
right, and and it's like, look, I get it, and it's sort of like when I am a journalist, right? I'm a lazy lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but but I went into journalism instead of law because I don't want to wait 20 years to get to the Supreme Court to have them say no to me. So I just get it out there, journalism, right? And then I'm also kind of like a first draft of history guy because I do everything. So I do all of these things because journalism is on the surface, right? Journalism is what you put on the bottom of the bird cage, right? It's not the thing you put behind you on your shelf. You don't have old papers from the Alaskan, the Anchorage Daily News there, so that's my plight as a journalist. And then I do this thing, podcasts and talk show hosting, that kind of thing. Because look, I'd rather yell from the sidelines and be that kind of activist than go through the rigmarole of the academy. Right. I've been an adjunct, but that's
we try to blur the lines, right? We blur the lines between these disciplines. Yeah.
So I respect that because you got your finger on the thing that's really the problem. We have lived through the trauma of history. And my thing, and the one-man shows I'm doing, because I've taken my storytelling, because essentially it's all storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Storytelling, journalism, fiction, whatever. You tell your stories and you reveal your trauma. And, it dawned on me as I was like going through these shows, these one-man shows I'm doing on Filipino history, that what I'm unveiling is I'm really trying to get at the stories from the scars that, have closed up the wound that is based on history, the history that I just kind of outlined there. Father comes, he's an American he's not an immigrant. He's an American who comes to America to say, here I am. This is why you conquered the Philippines, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's one very important piece that not a lot of Americans understand or know and understand today. When it comes to Filipinos, Jose Antonio Vargas, right? He's, one of the, probably the face of undocumented immigrant struggle right now.
I know.
One of the his most favorite things to say is that, he's here because America was there. And I think a lot of Americans don't understand that. They don't understand this colonial history.
Yeah, and
Um,
I got that. I was trying to think,
mhm,
how do I make this clear when I talk about my dad? And it's because
mhm.
when he came as American.
Yeah,
He was an
yeah.
American who came here. And that is like, I mean, all right. So is it far-fetched to say that I'm undergoing this post-traumatic stress
Mm.
because of the history? Is it
Well,
not? Yeah,
Kevin, my good friend Kevin Nadal,
yeah.
right? He's really done a good job of applying this notion of historical trauma or intergenerational trauma, what some folks might call it, um, to the Filipino experience. Historical trauma and intergenerational trauma has been talked about with other groups of people before, like with the Japanese American survivors, for example, of World War II internment. They talked about intergenerational trauma in that community. Same thing with Holocaust survivors. Same thing with Native Americans. And I think it's very real. I think a lot of Filipinos experience some form of intergenerational trauma. Trauma that we ourselves may not have directly experienced, but the generations before us did. And through our socialization, through different mechanisms, it's been passed on to us, whether we know it or not. It's been passed on to us and continues to affect us.
But we are
So,
feeling
yeah.
something real. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the racism that I
Yeah.
experience is
Mm-hmm.
generated from a racism that was meted out toward my father,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah,
And it,
yeah. Definitely. I think there's that. There's the indirect racism that we still feel and are still affected by, but then there's still also the direct ones that we continue to experience. In our modern day.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of this is very real. And earlier you mentioned my work, and I really I'd be super disrespectful if I don't acknowledge that there's a lot of other people who've been talking about this. You talked about you're of a certain generation, who've done a lot of work, and there are many people before me, even before you, who've
Oh
done
yeah.
a lot of this work for the Filipino American community, and I've been inspired by their work. I've been informed by their work. And so yeah, this is a lot of the things I'm talking about isn't new. I mean, colonial mentality isn't new.
Right.
Jose Rizal was talking about it, you
Right.
know?
No disrespect
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
intended, because we all
yeah.
know
Mm-hmm.
we are all on the shoulders of someone, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like that
Mm-hmm.
that Chinese acrobatic act. We're all on the shoulders.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
On
Yeah.
YouTube, see that it's kind of wild. They only go
Mm-hmm.
4 weeks though. Maybe why? If they're really Asian, they say, "Oh, why not 6 or 7?" But they're only 14.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So anyway, look, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Colonial mentality. It's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I first started writing about it. I mean, I've been writing about Asian Americans in the ethnic media for 25 years.
Yeah,
A
yeah. And
column.
isn't it frustrating though, Emil, that you and many other people before us have been talking about these issues and it's still here?
Still here, a generation, and our kids have it, and
Yeah.
kids will have it. And, but I point out with you, I've been talking about colonial mentality, like I said, for years. But you really hit it where it struck a chord with the academics, and it struck a chord with certain, and Kevin
Mm-hmm.
Nadal's also,
Mm-hmm.
but brown skin, white minds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just remember when we met
Mm-hmm.
first time, our dear late and lamented friend, Don
Mm-hmm.
Mabalan, who wrote
Mm-hmm.
Little Manila's in the Heart,
Yeah.
really a study of Stockton, California from a Filipino perspective. It will go down as one of the great books, like in
Yes.
an historian's perspective. There's a book that a lot of historians know. It's called Aikenfield, where they
Mm-hmm.
go to a little town in England, and they 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 break down who was from where, and all that, the history of that town. Well, for Stockton, Little Manila is in the Heart by Don Boholana Mabalan. That's going to be a classic going forward in
Yeah.
another generation for sure. We
Mm-hmm.
met uh, at her ceremony, her memorial service, very briefly, because there's so many people there, and I just remember. the phrase that came out of that whole the services for me was, it was by a friend, Dylan Delvo. He said from the you know the he was doing the eulogy. He said Don Mabalan is the least colonized Filipino I know, or the most decolonized Filipino I know. And that phrase stuck with me. That's in your wheelhouse. Where is the colonization of the Filipinos right now? We're too colonized still, right?
Yeah, no, we definitely are. You know, it took us, I mean, it's hard to overcome something that's taken so long, right, to develop and solidify. And you know, and there's a lot of debate right now about what does decolonization mean anyway. And right now there's a lot of disagreements between people who are supposed to be in the same side, right, in the same community, about who's woker than who's more decolonized than who, and all of that.
There's a woke contest.
Yeah, so and and that's tough, because we've lost so much, right? We've lost so much that a lot of us are trying to just grasp onto whatever is available and whatever is still left, and then they get criticized for that because it's not authentic enough, and so on. And it's hard, right? It's hard, and I think a lot of really strong young leaders to this day will bring us to something better. I really have hope with the younger generations. Yeah.
Well, they're both. I mean, we know that the Filipino immigrant community, just like all Asian American communities, probably about 2/3 immigrant, and it's a mix between those who are immigrant and those who are native born.
Yeah.
U.S. like myself, and we're not always on the same page.
No, we're not. But I really do hope that things will get better, and I'm optimistic that it will. There's a lot of divisions within our community, and a lot of that is because of colonial mentality. I think a lot of the legacies of colonialism has really damaged us. You mentioned one, right? This divide that exists between those who are American born versus those who are not, those who are more Americanized versus those who are newly arrived immigrants, right? There's this decades old debate between the fobs and the coconuts. And that's still happening, but that's just one of the many divides that's been created really by colonialism. I mean, we forget, for example, that the Filipino people is a very diverse group of people, with different cultures and different ethnicities and different languages in there. And we all just lump them together as if they're just one group, right? And because of colonialism, it erases, those very important distinctions between the different people from what is now known as the Philippines. And then there's religion, right? So that's another divide, right? Where, those who are Catholic, those who are Christians are for some reason regarded better than those who are not.
Well, look,
there's just a lot there.
we are double colonized, right? And when we get the stamp of, Ramos David and Guillermo, we're doubly screwed. Spanish, we're U.S.
Sure, we were doubly colonized, we were doubly screwed, but you know what? That just means that we're doubly strong, and we're doubly resilient. So
I like that positive spin, but for those who are listening, what is colonial mentality? Is it the mentality that says, look, you were Filipino at one point until we knocked this other stuff in, and now you're something else? How do you define it? How do you see it?
Well, generally, it's devaluing Filipino culture and Filipino identity and Filipino values, and replacing it with what we now think is better. And unfortunately, because of colonialism, what we now think is better, is Western values, or mostly American values, or American lifestyles and American languages and American culture and all of that. What does it look like in everyday life? Well, there's, feeling ashamed or feeling embarrassed for being Filipino, for example. At least this is based on my research. That's one of the more common I guess, expressions or symptoms, if you may, of what this is just feeling ashamed or embarrassed for being Filipino. Also discriminating against or making fun of, other people who you think are too Filipino or not Americanized enough, like making fun of their accents, calling them fobs, and all of that. Skin whitening, or regarding, the American standard of beauty as the standard of beauty.
Now keep in mind, this is before Lysol, before Trump came with Lysol.
Yeah, so skin whitening, whether it be using skin whitening products or staying away from the sun, which is really common in the Philippines too.
That was my mom's thing. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember her telling me in
Yeah.
the 60s, oh, you stay out, long sleeve shirt.
Yep.
You look like in the fields.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
fields. And, I said, hey, Mom, look, because she was brought here by a Spanish
Mm-hmm. There you go.
and she was a dressmaker, and she brought my mom, who was the dressmaker, to America and then let her fly. That was
Yeah.
her humanitarian deed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember, I used to be very surprised by that. Oh, well, I'm just,
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a thing.
Uh-huh.
Colonial mentality.
Yeah. And there's another thing too, that at least my research has suggested that there's this tendency to also tolerate or minimize experiences of injustice that we face here in America.
Like,
Like people will say, yeah, sure, you were treated badly, or you were made fun of at work, or maybe, yeah, sure, you did not get that raise at work that probably you deserve, but that's okay because life here is better.
oh yeah.
You see what I mean? So that mentality right there's like, it's okay because we're still better off here. So it's okay. So we tolerate, injustices and racism and oppression because, the mentality is, but at least we're here.
Right. I mean, because you eat all the rice you want here. No rice, maybe no rice.
All the spam.
All the spam.
And the corned beef. Yeah.
Oh, see now that I thought that was just we had a pantry of deviled ham and spam.
Oh no.
Oh, deviled ham, that was cool because you could just spread it. You didn't have
That's right. That's right.
That's right. But yeah, I mean the mentality of Filipinos, that was the thing. So are your kids saying, "Come on, Dad, basketball practice. You got to go to
Well,
basketball."
no, it's not my kids. It's actually my mom. My mom is visiting right now.
Oh, don't spread no lies about me.
Physical distance visit. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Well, look, this whole thing about colonial mentality, do we have to get rid of it? Really? It's better if we did, right?
Yeah. So one of the questions that people ask me frequently when I share with them my work on colonial mentality is the so what question. Well, so what? So what if we feel ashamed for being Filipino? Or so what if, if we think speaking accent-free English means that, it's a sign of intelligence, right? So what if we discriminate against, fobs? Or so what if we desire lighter skin tones? So it's the so what question is the more frequent questions that I receive. And so, my research actually shows that it's bad for our health. so that's the so what.
So that's the reason I'm crazy?
No, it's bad for our health in many ways, right? Research shows that, colonial mentality is related to lower self-esteem and more depression symptoms and more anxiety symptoms. Research shows that, that it's related to more psychological distress. So, and now more research in the Philippines. So they've kind of used some of my work to do it in the Philippines. And they are showing that colonial mentality is related to people's desire to leave the Philippines, which is logical, right? That makes sense. But now they're actually showing it empirically, like through, scientific studies, that colonial mentality attitudes is related to this desire to leave. And so when people are desiring to leave the country, that contributes to this thing that we have been talking about for decades, which is brain drain, right? Like all of the highly educated, trained professionals in the Philippines just want to leave the Philippines. And so then what happens to our country? What happens to our economy, and our culture and all of that? So it has a lot of implications.
Yeah, the brain drain, I remember them talking about it in the 60s when the doctors were leaving to come here, and then the doctors couldn't get certified, so they had to act like they had jobs as nurses, right? Or janitors in some cases.
But at least they're here.
Yeah, right. At least they're here. At least, and so the idea of the diaspora, it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. It's like the diaspora has. It's like a justification of the diaspora. Of course, you want to leave the Philippines because
Mm-hmm.
who would want to stay in the
Yep.
Philippines,
Yep.
right?
I mean, right now, given this pandemic, right, the Filipino nurses, there's a spotlight now on Filipino healthcare workers, especially nurses, and now this thing that we've known for decades, that that the nursing training in the Philippines really has been modeled after American training models, or systems. And essentially, what's been happening in the Philippines is that we train nurses to leave the country, to go work for other countries like the United States. So we've pretty much created a factory of nurses in the Philippines to benefit other countries, not necessarily to benefit the Philippines.
Right. The nurses are like they're the Florence Nightingales
Oh
of this
yeah.
generation. And meanwhile, for
Mm-hmm.
Americans, they go to the medical schools because they're not smart enough to get into the U.S. medical schools. And they get the white doctors training there, and you get the
Yeah.
Filipino nurses who are super nurses coming
Yeah.
here.
Uh-huh.
I guess that's the colonial balance, right? That's the
Very much so. And I think there's a lot of statistics that show that, right? I mean, Filipinos, for example, people always say, look how highly educated Filipinos are and
yeah.
how highly trained they are. Sure, when we look at educational achievement, right? Filipinos, primarily because a lot of them come from the Philippines, and we have this preferential immigration system right now. So we have highly educated and highly trained Filipinos, but then when you look at how much they're earning,
Yeah.
it doesn't compare
Yeah.
to other people with lower levels of achievement
Right.
than they do.
They're
Yeah.
still looked on as foreigners,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I talked about this Pew study that just came out saying, hey, look, we're not foreigners. There's 11 million Asian Americans who are
Yeah.
naturalized.
Yeah.
They are citizens and they are
Yeah.
eligible voters. They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
foreigners.
Yeah. No.
They're as American as can be. And, you
Yeah.
know,
That perpetual foreigner stereotype that's there. It's always been there, right? So, and many Asian Americans have been here for many generations. You, for example, is one of them,
right,
right?
well, we got a historical thing going because I should, by rights, be 85 years old. I should be dating your mother, because my father came in the 20s, so I
Yeah.
should be, if he was able to start a family, but
Uh-huh.
be able to start a family for at least a generation. So we
Mm-hmm.
got a missing generation. That's in my play, but
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk about that more later. But I did mention Asian Americans,
Yeah.
and I know I've been following your tweets.
Yeah.
I know you
Yeah.
got a thing about, hey, I'm tired of this
Hey,
pandemic. I'm tired of this Pan-Asian stuff.
it,
Pandemic
I
okay, but Pan-Asian,
yeah.
so state your case and let's talk.
Well,
Maybe I can help you.
yeah. So my case is this, right? So, and this. This is not new either. A lot of the things we're talking about today aren't new. Ever since the Asian American movement was started in the 60s, 70s, right? There was a political reason to do that, right? I understand all of that. There's strength in numbers. There are benefits to inter Asian solidarity movements. I understand all of that, but even back then when it was created, Filipinos right from the get-go already felt like they were being marginalized, and they felt like they were not being represented by this brand new back then Asian American pan-ethnic community,
They were
right? So that's
colonized.
why,
They were
huh?
colonized. They were colonized.
Yeah, but they felt like they were kind of being marginalized even within this pan-ethnic identity, right? That's why even back then they created the brown Asian term. I mean, that did not come from me. That's not a new term. Right from the get-go, Filipinos already were saying, yeah, there's a brown Asian caucus,
Yeah, and
right?
notice how the Indians
Yeah.
joined the South Asians now.
Hmm.
Hey, we're brown
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, exactly. And and so even back then it was already happening, right? But now I think because it's evolved so much, when we look at the Asian American population today, right? It looks very different than the Asian American population in the 60s and the 70s. And even back then, it was already an issue. This brown Asian marginalization was already an issue. But now, especially now, when we look at the Asian American population now, you know, at least half, 50% of the Asian American population now are brown Asian. So, and yet the marginalization continues.
Yeah, you know, I would say yes in a way, because it has become a cultural thing where you say Asian, people think Chinese.
Yeah.
You say Asian, maybe people
Yeah.
think Japanese.
Yeah.
You say Asian, maybe people think K-pop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
low.
Well, that's my case. Is I'm trying to kind of change this dominant narrative that is really no longer accurate.
It's
You
more
know,
diverse. It's more diverse than it is.
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, it's no longer accurate. That's just the reality of how things are right now. That, you know, when you think of Asian American, the automatic image that pops into your mind should not just be East Asian, because that's not reality. If that's what automatically pops into your mind, then your reality is distorted. It's inaccurate.
Yeah, and
So,
and yet you know what happens. Like the nurse that I talked to, Filipino nurse, goes on the subway
yeah,
and he's told, "Hey, go back to China." So,
yeah. Well, no, that's very real too, right? That's very real in that, you know, there are many Filipinos you know, racists don't give a F
yeah,
about these differences. You know, racist to racists, we're all the same.
yeah,
So I get that. I understand that. You know, but we must care. We must give an F.
yeah.
You know, so just because there are very important differences there. You know, and as real as those experiences are of racism, and again, this is the anti-Asian racism, especially under this pandemic. You know, that's very real and that's very serious. And many Filipinos do experience that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I'm not trying to minimize that at all. All I'm saying is that, you know, in our effort to be in solidarity with other Asians, we should not lose track of, you know, the differences that do exist between us as well. So
Yeah, we can have Asian Pacific American Heritage Month and be our own thing, and
sure.
know that we're a coalition. But here's one thing I noticed. Like I made reference to this in my column about the Pew research. They kind of leave out the Native Hawaiian and the Pacific to their own. And once again, it's probably because of the census. The census has them in their own thing, so they just count the Asian Americans. But you ask a lot of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, and while they have an affinity for their own groups, they like the fact that they are that they are the P in Asian Pacific American, and that they are now part of, instead of a smaller group, they're part of like a 23 million plus group. And I've always used the analogy of, hey, what is that big lump underneath our Asian American rug? Oh, those are the Samoans and the Tongans and the Pacific Islanders, and that we just kind of shove in there and I try to ignore. But we're the point is, I guess, that we are a much more diverse group, and in a artificial constructed month like May, where we honor Asian Pacific Americans, hey, we should just embrace it. We're all the same, but don't for a second just get away with thinking we're just Chinese or we're just Japanese.
And, you know, and to me, it's about, you know, one, lifting up experiences and voices that have been, you know, historically forgotten. So that's one. And then two, like I was saying earlier, just with the reality of who Asian Americans are today, you know, and this disproportionate forgetting, you know, it's not okay, right? So it's not, we cannot be okay with it. And you know, if people might be listening, people might be not, but I wouldn't feel right about myself, and I wouldn't feel good about myself if I don't continue to point it out.
That's all we do. You just got to point it out. And it could take decades, generations, but we, you know, people say, oh, they were the guys with the fingers pointing it out back then, and it'll be a new generation. Maybe your students, maybe people who listen to these things, it'll say, hey, back then in 2020, they were thinking about this and pointing it out, and we're just getting around. If they still care about a Filipino-ness, that's a phrase that I first used in I think 1991, the idea
Mhm.
of one's Filipino-ness,
Yeah. Yeah.
because we, we have it, but sometimes I don't think we really suppress it. We just sort of
Hmm.
are. But Filipino-ness, I always try to seek it out. I always try to enhance it, but
Hmm.
a lot of people would say it would knock the Filipino stuff out of you, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so now look, you are the Filipino of the hour because there's this big Asian Pacific American Heritage Month uh, documentary on PBS.
Yeah. Yeah.
Renee Tajima Pena, or
Yeah.
she's behind it. And
It's a 5-part documentary. Yeah.
tell me about it. How did you get involved?
Oh no, I'm not in the documentary. They that little feature. There's a little feature on me. Um, you
Yeah.
know, as part of what PBS is doing is a lot. Um, I'm not part of that 5-part documentary.
Oh, you're not. Oh,
No, 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 no,
bad. My bad.
no,
So,
no, no, no.
oh, well, then I'm going to criticize him for not putting you in there.
I don't know. I think a lot of that is about like very important historical moments, though. I think Larry Itliong in the story of the United Farm Workers is going to be on there,
That's, that's
and then
good.
the Japanese internment is going to be on there.
And
Um,
and
yeah.
from your perspective, so you were just used as a promotional thing.
It's a promotional thing.
You were colonized. Mark, look
No,
at you.
it's cool. I mean, I don't know. You know, I think there might be more of that coming out, more little promotional features coming out.
Well, yeah. Now, all right. I will reserve judgment. I know Renee's a good director. I'll reserve judgment until I see it. But I thought, oh, well, they're gonna highlight EJ.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I'm
They
not.
they should. They should.
Yeah.
Before you're truly
I'm
discovered.
excited about that documentary, though.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard many things about it, so I'm excited and curious to see uh, what it's about.
Yeah. And we have Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in May.
Yeah,
And I made a big deal about this in one of my recent columns. I said, heritage it's not history. History
no.
is history. Heritage is the root is inheritance. This is what we inherit.
Hmm.
What have Filipinos, what have Asian Americans inherited? But specifically, since we're both Filipino, what have we inherited? And what is the bad inheritance? Or is it a good inheritance? Or should we go through a gene thing where we,
Oh no.
go through a test before we procreate and make sure we don't want any three-headed Filipinos? So we better, what have we inherited from the past?
Oh wow, that's a big question. Well, at least to me, we were kind of talking about it earlier. I think we inherited a lot of colonial ways. Um, some of it we might regard as good things, some of it we might regard as not so good things. But because of our, colonial history, 500 years, and many people will say it's still happening right now. We just don't call it colonial anymore. But because of our colonial history, I think we've inherited and developed and solidified many ways of thinking and behaving and feeling uh, that may have damaged us. And I don't want to sound really dark and pessimistic right now, but unfortunately, I think many of those inheritance um, have been so have become so ingrained um, that it might be permanent. Earlier you were asking me about decolonization. What does that look like? Well, without getting into the larger debate about what decolonization really means, because some people will say, well, decolonization means give us back the land. Like get the heck out of our lands. That's colonialism really is about land and resources, right? But but in this case, since we're talking about a mentality, you know, maybe decolonization can really mean, or can also mean, not can really mean, but decolonization can also mean decolonizing the way that we think about things, right? This automatic preference for anything American, for example, this automatic positive regard for anything Western over anything Filipino. Can we get rid of that? Well, Yeah, maybe, sure. I mean, to me, on one hand, I'm like, well, that's learned behavior, right? Those things are learned. So if you can learn it, then you can unlearn it, right? However, when I think about um, things that have been so ingrained, things that have been happening for many generations now, have been passed on for many, many generations now, that it's become so automatic. It's hard to erase it. I mean, just think about like riding a bike. Like once you learn how to ride a bike, you can't just unlearn it. You can't just like all of a sudden, oh, I don't know how to ride a bike anymore. Or tying your shoelaces, right? Once you learn it, once you've done it enough, it becomes automatic to you that you can do it, seamlessly, and effortlessly. Typing on a keyboard. If you can remember, when you were just learning how to type on a keyboard, it was probably very effortful. But over time, now you don't even look at the keyboard anymore. You know where all the letters are. Your fingers just know it. So is it possible to unlearn it? Sure, but I don't know. I really don't know.
Are you one of those clinical psychologists who give drugs?
Drugs. Is there a decolonizing drug? Oh my goodness! Don't give pharmaceutical companies any ideas, Emil.
No, Datu
Oh.
Datu one shot. Hey, EJ.R. I come to you because I respect your work, and I hope I don't want to abuse this privilege of calling on you and having you come on, because I enjoy talking to you. You are an insightful Filipino, and you laugh at some of my jokes, so that's a good thing. But also, I'm dealing with my own colonization and decolonization, and I go back to, to Harvard as as almost like my Lapu Lapu slaying Magellan moment, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there, but I know that I was traumatized by my years there, and I know it's impacted me throughout,
Mm-hmm.
throughout all my career, throughout media. I mean, I'm working in the ethnic media. I'm doing podcasts on Filipinos, for goodness sakes.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to show some kind of trauma, you know, because I
Yeah.
feel a comfort level talking to you about, where we are.
Mm-hmm.
This is about us and about Asian Americans,
Yeah.
and so there's a sense of relief, when you can sort of see, oh, there's, that's how that works. And I hope that when people listen to this, it'll give them pause to think about their Filipino-ness, about
Mm-hmm.
their own, where their head's at in terms of Filipino thought, Asian American thought. And I hope that our Asian American brothers and sisters, when they listen to this, they'll say, hey, wow, that's why those Filipinos are all screwed up. But,
Yeah.
or at least they'll think, oh, they're not screwed up, but, they understand
Something happened. Yeah.
something happened.
Mm-hmm.
And for some of us, it's still happening.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right now that's one of the more important things for Filipinos, at least, is to, if we can just pause even for a second, whenever we have, certain attitudes or certain thoughts or certain feelings about whatever it might be, to pause for a second and be a little bit more critical about it, because otherwise, this colonial mentality is going to continue to affect us, continue to affect our decisions, our attitudes, our behaviors, um, outside of our awareness.
it's just going to
And
just happen.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Automatic. Yeah.
And that's been happening for generations. And and if we have a chance, of stopping it, then that'll be the first key step. Is for us to become aware that it exists within us, and then hopefully we can be a little bit more mindful of it, and a little bit more effortful in stopping it.
Yeah. Or maybe more authentically Filipino or Asian American.
Whatever that means.
you know, as I said it, as I blurted it out, what the hell am I asking him? Listen, right. If you had one thing
Yeah.
I made you God in the Emil Amok universe here, and you could like erase something. Not this interview, but to erase something in Filipino colonial mentality or colonial mentality, because we weren't the only colonized. Hey, the
Yeah.
Indians colonized,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
South Asia,
Yeah.
the Vietnamese,
Uh-huh.
they were colonized by the French, so they have
Yeah.
better food than us. Uh,
No way. No, 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 no.
okay, all right, all right.
Filipino food. No. Uh-uh.
I exposed my Francophile. My Francophile. Hey, so what would you say? What would you say is the one thing that you would erase and like start?
My practical, there's a lot. You know this, right? That's why you're asking for just one. But I think the practical side of my brain um, would like me or would wish for the skin whitening industry to go away. Um, I think the skin whitening industry is a I don't know, multi-million, perhaps billion-dollar industry worldwide. This is not just a Filipino thing. People from all over the world, Africa, Asia, India, um, skin whitening um, is huge in all of those areas. And skin whitening is damaging to people's health, both physical health, and that's a scientific fact. It's damaging to people's physical health, but like I was saying earlier, it's also damaging to people's mental health. And I think so it's those for those reasons I would get rid of the skin whitening industry. um, and in addition to its health uh, detriments, I think it also damages different cultures. It really perpetuates this notion that who they are and their natural indigenous skins are not good enough. So it addresses that particular attitude as well. So that's what I would erase the skin whitening industry.
All right, as the god of Guillermo Emil Amok's Takeout Universe, we will grant that, and we'll see how well you've done when we talk to you again, because there will be a next time. There will be.
Yes, I had fun, Emil.
Well, look, I had fun talking to you too. So, E.J.Ramos, David.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you very much. The author of Brown Skin, White Minds, a professor at the University of Alaska. Take care of your mother, your kids, your family. Stay safe. We'll talk to you again soon. And really, thank you for being part of Emil Amok's Takeout.